Well, welcome back to the Pastor Pod. We are both in our studios, one in Venice, one in the Orlando area. And if you're new with us, we're two pastors that are wandering through conversations about life, ministry, church, culture. I'm here with my good friend Jay Mudd. And man, glad you're here for another exciting episode.
Wandering. That's the word you choose to use today.
Is that a good word? Wandering? Meandering?
I think so. Meandering through conversations from our studios, which our studios don't. Actually, my picture right now, if you're watching, it looks sort of like a studio. I mean, I've got these sound boards like that. You, on the other hand, have a curtain. Sort of like the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, it's not great, but I mean, I didn't want to be in front of the bookshelf too much. I don't want to look too, too heady for the podcast.
But that's
because everybody knows it's just not who I am.
That is who you are.
The Pastor Pod is a practical podcast. It's not super, super deep. So if that's what you're into, we probably will not be very interesting to you. But if you need some down to earth information,
Jay, you can.
We're more ground troops,
Yeah.
But we're here for another great episode. I think we're on episode 43, Jay, which is just exciting to think about. 43,
43,
maybe 44, maybe. I don't even know where we're at, but yeah, we're coming up on 50, and we're going to have
you are such a pastor. You 42,
we're coming
43,
up on 50.
We're coming up on 50. We're coming up in the mid 40s.
Mid 40s. Okay, well,
how many
50s
people
around the
attended your
corner.
church Sunday? 1,000, maybe 1,500.
Well, yeah, Pastor Matt's like, I think there's about 50,000 people in the room right now. I don't know, or 200. I don't know, but it's somewhere in between there.
43 or 45, but we're coming up on 50. We are. You're right. We're coming up on 50.
Everyone's just
closer
like,
number is probably mid 40s here.
Yeah, but we're having fun, and we have some great guests. We've had some great guests in the past. We have another guest on today, Pastor Aaron Still. We'll introduce him to you in just a second. But we love learning from leaders. I mean, I love learning from Jay. I love learning from who comes on. But it's always just something new and fresh. I feel like every time.
And one of our topics, the topics we're going to talk about today, is sending, church planning, which I know is dear to my heart and your heart as well. And so this is going to be a great conversation with your pastor. I want to encourage you, get your notepad out. Some great information that's about to be dropped. And so
let me say this before we dive in, just one little quick thing. We want to hear from you. Like, I've had some folks send questions in through social media, Instagram or Facebook. But if you have a question or questions beyond what we've already collected, that you'd like us to hit on this fall, why don't you send it to us, thepastorpod@gmail.com. We'll share that at the end here, or on social media. We want to be able to meet you where you're at. If you have it could be really transparent stuff. It could be church related, culture related. We want to hear from you as a listener. So if you are listening right now, shoot us a email or, a DM on Instagram or Facebook. We'd love to know.
All right. Yes. And now, without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Aaron Still.
Well, we're excited to welcome Aaron Still to the Pastor Pod. We had a chance to connect at the Send Network luncheon up in Jacksonville a few months ago. And so we all met there. Some guys I knew, but Aaron was one pastor I hadn't had the chance to meet. And he is in Melbourne, Florida, which, Aaron, we found out pretty quickly that's where my family lived, in Palm Bay, which is the next town over, and just kind of reminiscing about the Space Coast, Brevard County. But man, we're glad you're here. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk with you guys for a little bit.
Yeah. Tell us a little about yourself. Like, tell us a little bit more about you and your family, and just a little bit of your story.
Yeah. So my title is, I'm the church planning pastor at First Baptist Melbourne. It's kind of a, specialized thing, but, as a church that wants to send, they just kind of put me over this big project. And I'm actually serving at the church where I was called to ministry at, and I grew up at. So my life kind of took a journey where I graduated from here in Melbourne, Florida, went to UCF, met my wife over there, and then we went up to seminary in North Carolina, and then basically retraced our steps back. We came down on a church plant to East Orlando, and then came back to Melbourne. And so I've been married for I think 16 years now, and I've got 5 kids from 14 to 9 or to 8 to 8, and
awesome.
Keep me busy, but they're a lot of fun. I got all their artwork sitting behind me in my office, so keeps me motivated to get home and get my stuff done. So.
Mm-hmm.
I won't tell your wife you did not know how many years you've been married. And I won't tell your kids you didn't know how old they were. I won't tell anybody.
Yeah,
well, you both have 5 kids, so that's pretty cool.
I can show that sympathy. Yeah. 5 kids, you start thinking, I don't know how old they are. I don't know what's going on.
We go through like birthday season. So from like August until January, we have all 7 birthdays. And so we're about to hit. So I'm just like, okay, I just got to do the quick math in my head. So
we spaced ours out a little bit more than that. But mine range from 14. My oldest is 14 like you. And my youngest is 5. Okay. And so we had a little Boston baby when we were church planting in Boston. And so it's funny you say church planting pastor is, one of the new roles I just took on was part of that is going to be my role here is the church planting here and being a pastor who helps to mobilize the church here. So tell us a little bit more about your ministry role there and help us understand a little bit more, because you did say it's a little bit unique. Not every church that you're going to go to is going to have a church planting pastor. And so tell us a little bit more about that role, that unique role that you have at FBC.
Yeah. So First Baptist is it's a traditional church, choir, Sunday school. It's been around for 100 years. And the pastor is actually someone who grew up here at the church and is a product of the discipleship ministry of the church. He took over for a pastor who was my pastor for 25 years here in Melbourne, and kind of transitioned him over. And so we were at seminary together at Southeastern, and he just has a big heart for sending and for church planting. And they basically said, okay, we want to be a church planting church. They got involved with missions and church and other church plants supporting them. And they're like, okay, so we want to do this. And they got some resources from like Family Church and Summit and other places. And he had materials and he's like, I just can't, how do we put this together and actually make it into a plan? And so I was back in the state over in Orlando, and he asked if I would just come kind of bring the material together and get a residency started or get something started to help him get the plan together. And because I knew the church and the culture, I was able to, and I had seen some residencies and been a part of a church plant, I was able to kind of put that together. And then it turned into, hey, will you come on staff and just lead this? And there was a tough decision to say yes, but we just felt God leading us back to Melbourne, a place I never thought I'd end up again. And so my job is really to help identify church planners and to help equip them and send them out. And so we've got a goal of planting 10 churches in 10 years. And so we're in year 3, almost year 3 of that. We've launched our first plant. They launched in Easter. We've got another one that's in residency now that'll launch it at the end of the year. And we're on the docket we've got our next one, working through details on that. And so it's just, it's almost like you can almost plant like a church once by accident, but like doing it again and again and again, it's like, there's gotta be some sort of plan and trajectory that you're trying to hit. And so it's a real fun kind of ministry because you get to pour into leaders. You get to think creatively, think strategically about things, get to experiment, which I really love doing. And so, I've just been really blessed to do that here and with these guys that I really trust. Like I'm working with my old youth pastor, who was my youth pastor in like 7th grade, and we're on staff.
That's cool.
So it's pretty wild. So
it's cool to see that full circle, that God brought you back to where, you grew. And like you said, that wasn't part of your plan. I remember us talking at lunch, you're like, we didn't think we'd ever be back. And of course, growing up, I lived in 5 states all over the US, and thankful for all those places. I learned a lot, but we love Palm Bay. Like, of course, I had lived in like Louisiana and Texas and some other places that, no offense to those areas, just are not Palm Bay on the beach. Okay. It's but we laughed and joked about like how God has a sense of humor sometimes when we say, there's been many times in my life I've said, well, I probably won't do this, or I probably won't go here. And God's like, oh, really? That's right. A good joke. But at the same time, God is, like you said, he's wired you, it sounds like, to really fit this role well, where you're not only equipping leaders, but you're teaching vision too, right? So you're extending the vision your pastor gave you, right? But how does that work? Like how have you navigated that with your lead pastor or whatever, if it's senior pastor, I'm not sure what, the key pastor, how does that work? Because I know for Jay, you're getting ready to start your new role, next week or week after?
Yes. August 1.
So like officially, right? So I don't know. I think it's fascinating. I love that both churches you guys are part of are already thinking future. You're not just thinking, how do we take care of this church currently, but they're thinking ahead. how do we equip and empower? Just talk to us about how you onboarded, like how did that become, how did you get your feet under you and then built it to what it is today?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing was the vision to be a church planting church came from the lead pastor. He had a heart for it, and he's like, we've got to figure out how to get there. And then that permeated through the rest of the staff and the church. I think when I first got here, I wasn't even on staff. I was kind of consulting to kind of get them going, and we were at a staff retreat, and we read the Gaining by Losing J.D. Greear book as a staff. All the pastors read it to kind of just start, okay. Because when you say we're going to send, it means a few things. It means that you're going to have to devote time and resources to doing this. You're going to have to talk about it a lot. And ultimately, you're going to have to send people away that you'd probably much rather keep, that are really doing great things for the church, that are very valuable. And you're going to have to send people away and you're going to have to take that kingdom-minded approach. And so as our pastor Scott, he was just driving this and leading this, and he really brought me in to say, hey, will you just help develop a residency? I'm like, yeah, I can do that. But if you want to do this for the next decade, you've got to back up a few steps. And we've got to get, when First Baptist Melbourne thinks about church planting, they don't think some gifted planter or some uber charismatic, guy who's just going to rally people and go. They think that's something for me. That's a role that I can play. There's something that I can do in that. So the whole church, so one of the things, healthy things reproduce, the natural byproduct of discipleship is church planting. And you go back and you look in the book of Acts, and it's just something that they did. It wasn't just, okay, so we're doing all these things, or it wasn't divorced from the mission of the church. It was the mission of the church. And so our church, we've been around for 100 years, and in that time we have planted about 10 churches. And so, but there had been a time where we've given sacrificially to start churches, most of them in our area. So it wasn't completely foreign to the church, but to have this kind of tenacity and more of a audacious goal to do it every year was a little bit different. And so when I came in, it was really trying to make church planting normal for the church, and to get them to connect with, and even telling the pastors, hey, the person that walks through the door, maybe gets saved this Sunday, could be our church planter 5 years from now. So what are we doing as a church to getting that person ready to be discipled, and then maybe make that jump to, hey, maybe I'm called to plant a church. What can we do? And so that was probably my biggest challenge in doing that. But the biggest thing was the support of the pastor, and then the support of the rest of the pastors at the church. They bought into the vision, and they're like, okay, they almost fought for, like, I was kind of in the back, like, I'm not sure how much to push this. And they're like, yeah, you need to get out there more. And they're really supportive in a bunch of different ways. So.
Wow. Awesome. I love that, the idea of the natural fruit of discipleship is church planting. And I think it's something that's a biblical concept that you see. But as you're doing this, there's no doubt, as you're doing this, as you're leading this charge and, working through this, you're seeing some challenges, and there has been some challenges, maybe even challenges you've overcome. But at the time you were like, how are we going to get through this? Right. We all face those types of things, especially when you're talking about multiplication. You're talking about growing by, gaining by losing. Those are tough concepts. They're not easy. There's friendships, there's relationships, there's people involved. And anytime you get people involved, it gets messy and it gets challenging. So what are some of those challenges? Could you highlight a couple of challenges that you faced along the way as you're developing this sending culture there in Melbourne?
So the biggest one, and I think it's kind of maybe a nationwide challenges, is that planter, that called, competent, qualified planter. We were very fortunate, and God brought us two guys very early who had very clear calls to plant a church. We basically sent one out, had the other wait, and then jumped him in the residency the next year. And then in this year and some of the other ones, trying to find that planter is just difficult, because it's a complicated thing. And a lot of the planters that I'm talking to that are considering it are kind of like, it's like one of many options, right? They're either in a transition but that calling, a lot of times, like, even being able to articulate a calling to church plant is a difficult thing, because it's there, but you just don't know how to get it out. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's one thing that we're finding, like, okay, so for year 1, year 2, maybe year 3, I mean, some of those things are there, but like 5, 6, 7, like if our discipleship is deficient, or if we're not catching these guys early, we're gonna not see the fruit. Lord, if he doesn't send those or drop those people in our lap, we need to be developing those people. So that's something that we're trying to really take a turn towards and try to overcome. And I think the second one is, I mean, that's really the biggest one we've had. And I think it's a really specific, it's kind of an inside baseball problem that we're having. They're different philosophy. We always want to send our planners out with another elder. So we want them to do it with somebody else. That's so right. They don't have to be on staff. They could be a lay elder, but we go back and forth between like someone who's an admin kind of person, executive pastor who can help with details, and worship is another one. And it's almost like you need all three, but you can't really do all three. And so it's like, okay, you get to choose 2 of the 3, and which one do you do? Now we were able to send a team of 3 with the last one, but he's being supported by some other ministries. But even as we think about this one and trying to find that second elder who will come alongside, I mean, it's that leadership is really important, because they're going to be the ones making that call, trying to just keep everybody going and connected. And so those are it's kind of both leadership things, and that's what's really gotten us to say, okay, we need to really focus on this now at our church. So, for years 5 through 10 type of thing. So
can I ask you a follow-up question? Yeah. And again, I'm just curious, because I realized exactly what you're talking from somebody who was a church planting a catalyst kind of in Boston. We helped to plant other churches in Boston in those 7 years. I had the same kind of goal of 10 churches in 10 years. We got to year 7, and COVID messed that up a little bit, because we started before COVID. COVID messed that 10-year mark up for us. I was like, can I get those back? Do I get to buy those back? Do I get a freebie? Is it now 10 and 12 years? Come on, give me a break. Planning a church during COVID.
Come on.
So I get it. And I think what you're talking about is the number one challenge that we identified in Boston as well, is that, that leadership quality of right now, what we're finding is there are some church planters out there that are, they're from the outside of our church that may be seeking something like a residency coming in.
Right.
But what you're saying is, and I think you're hitting it spot on, is this idea that it really is all about the discipleship of the church, because that person who just walked into your door and got saved 5 years from now, that's who you want the church planter to be, right? Yep, that's what I hear you saying. Now, and again, this is not meant to be a negative or a positive. I'm just curious. This is curiosity in me going, how have you met a lot of churches, or have you met a lot of churches that have been successful and planting out of just the flock within the church? So they weren't a pastor beforehand. They weren't in transition. You get what I'm saying? You get the question I'm asking? Yeah. Have you at FBC been successful in that, or have you know of other churches? Because I know that's a goal of yours. And again, I think that should be the goal of all of us. Yeah. But how successful have we been? Because I think you're hitting something really, really important here that really needs to be discussed. Is this, how do we grow church planners? How do we build up church planners within the context of our church versus trying to find them? Because I believe that river is drying up of church planners that are just going to come to us seeking it. It's going to need to be a discipleship thing. So I'm sorry, I'm getting a little passionate, but I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on that? Are you seeing that personally, or talk to churches?
There are a couple places where I've seen it better than most. And I've asked that same question to several people. And even I've got a chance to meet a couple church planting professors at the seminaries and talk to them. And it's a constant, and even from NAM, it's like, yeah, this is the problem. This is the kink in the hose. This is the thing that it's not the training. It's not the funding. It's the planter. And even in our case, it's the team that we want to send out together, because we don't want to send them out as an island. And so, so a lot of times I ask that question. I'm like, hey, when you figure that out, you let me know. I'm like, okay, great. So, well, at least I feel like, okay, we're in the same boat, at least trying to figure it out. So that's kind of what caused a shift in us. But 2 places I know that have done it probably better than most. Family Church down in West Palm Beach with Jimmy Scroggins. Yep. I know we got a chance to, and he was at the luncheon too. Mike Warnock, I think, and it was awesome. Just
Mike's coming on in a few months to talk as well. So
we took a lot of the stuff from them. They've been very open-handed with their things, but I think they've got a different approach in planning campuses and different things like that. But a lot of the people, it's a mix. Some people come to them who have got, they're pastors of a church and they kind of want to join the family church model and that thing. But some of it is through the discipleship there. So I think having the pathway for them is important to say, okay, hey, you're here. We can plug you into some training. And then from there, you could go a bunch of different places, but one of those places could be church planning. Okay. And so the other one that I think does it better than most would be Summit in Raleigh-Durham. And they're just descending church of everything, missionaries, church. And I got a chance to see, I was in their executive pastor cohort years ago and went down on one of their church plants. And I got to kind of see what they were doing. Now they have the benefit of being right in the backyard of one of the seminaries. That's a very sending-minded seminary. So that's fantastic. I think one of the answers could be just to build an awesome world-class seminary in town, and then that can solve that problem. But like some of them, so they got a lot of people that were from outside, but they also had a fair amount of folks on their staff that were feeling the call to church. And one of my favorite stories was Andrew Hopper, who was at Mercy Hill, I think in Greensboro. I can't remember the name of the church, but
that's it. Yeah.
Rocking and rolling in young adult ministry. And if you know anything about Summit, their young adult ministry is like a really big deal in college. And he was doing an awesome job with that. Felt a call to church plant. And so the leadership at Summit's like, okay, what do we do? Like, he's doing an awesome job, a phenomenal job at a really important role in our church, but then we believe in church planning. Do we send him or do we try to like defer that? And they sent him. And then he took, a huge amount of people and now they're doing awesome. And so the freedom from Summit to say, hey, we're going to send you. And I think that's one of the things that attracts people to the Summit is knowing that they can be sent. So I think within the church, and one of the things at the Summit is they've got this long runway. They've got a long pathway from internship to maybe not a pastor, but just, a ministry helper and group leader. They've got these. And so the Summit can like watch these guys and their competency and their character develop and grow. And they can give them more specialized growth plans in areas where they need to develop before they send them out. And that's the advantage of having of that. Like the advantage of getting someone from outside is they're like ready to go, but they're ready to go, but you don't know anything about them. And so you've got this thing where you're trying to like, okay, is there, are they like kidnapping puppies and we just don't know about it or something like that? Or, or are they the real deal? You just don't know. But someone that you've seen do ministry for 5 years, and you've seen them grow and develop that, but one takes, a job posting on Indeed, and the other one takes 5 years of discipleship. So if you want to plan down the road, and that's where we're saying, okay, God just laid 2 church planners in our lap that we have discipled, and they've been a part of the ministry of our church, and we're sending out. And we've got many other people, but like we need to, if we're not developing them, we're not gonna, we might get, we might come close to the goal, which is still, praise God for that, but we're never going to keep that thing going. They've got to work together. What we do in discipleship and that goal of church planning, they've got to be like this. And that's what we're working right now to try to marry up.
So 2 things. You're saying discipleship includes evangelism and mission.
Well, so this is one of the things.
Because that's a big thing, man. People, are you more discipleship? I remember interviewing, like, are you more of a discipleship guy or an evangelism? I'm like, yes. Yes. Because you can't have one without the other. But I love that
I would have said prophecy. Neither prophecy.
But I say that, I don't mean to derail the conversation, but so your mindset is, okay, we lead someone to Christ, we baptize them, we help them grow spiritually, we walk with them so that they might not be the pastor of the church, but they could be a part of this movement of planting the gospel wherever God has called them to go, whether that's at their work, whether that's at, the ball field, whether that's at an actual church, right? That's what we're saying. And so with some, but this is a change though. Like most churches don't define discipleship this way. They define discipleship as a class or how much knowledge you have, although all those things can help.
Yeah.
But talk about that. That's a big shift it might be easier for a church plant to get there. but you're talking about a 100-year-old church.
Yep.
That I applaud First Baptist Melbourne for thinking that way and being willing to, probably for many of them, have a new mindset.
Well, and this is, so as I was doing some of the cohorts at Summit, they would say the word discipleship, but define it in terms of evangelism. So it took me it took me a while when they'd say that, and then they would talk about it. I'm like, we're not talking about the same thing. Like you're defining this word differently. And so, that set me on. I'm like, okay, so why am I defining this word this way? Why is there a bifurcation of these two? Or are they really together? And then like an extreme ministry example of that in practice is like the T4T movement, the micro church planting movement overseas, where they're sharing the gospel with somebody, and then they're the church planner like next week. I mean, now, and they're doing discipleship and they're teaching them things, but they're like, okay, now that you're saved, they're pointing them on that mission. And there are some people in our church who thought that's you want to talk about a shift. That's a shift on the other side. But even some of those principles, like, and so we're saying that, okay, so if you're here at our church, like we do a commissioning, we did the commissioning last year, we're going to do it again this year. And I'm like, my job is to get people who love this church, to get them on stage and send them away and make all of you guys sad that they're going away. But that's what we should be doing. And that's what, and again, this is the normal byproduct of discipleship is going and leveraging your life on mission wherever you go. And so it's even less about that process, but that philosophy, that core philosophy, what a disciple is and what a disciple is to do and how a disciple is supposed to be engaged. If they're not all working together, then you can have the goal, but you'll send out some people, but you're never going to send out. That's got to be who you are.
Like your DNA, like your core of the heartbeat of the church. So, and this is probably what I've spent most of my time on as a pastor, is explaining to people that are already in the family of God what discipleship is biblically to Jesus, right? Follow me and I will show you how to fish for people. It's not just, like I said, they're not divorced, and it's not that either side is both sides of the coin matter, but the end goal is to glorify God by making disciples. So the idea is you should replicate yourself, and how many people in our churches don't share their faith, don't invite people to church, don't even, many of them can't even imagine starting a new small group and actually opening up their lives to new people. If we're honest, let's just be real honest. This is a huge shift. What both of you guys not only have done in the past, but what you're really focused on in your churches is you're helping your church see the harvest, live on mission, all those things. Now, does your church have a clear philosophy on whether you plant autonomous churches within a certain distance, or is it or we do campuses that are loosely affiliated, or where have you guys landed with that? Because that's a big question for pastors today. How do we do this if we decide to go down that road?
That's a good question. And in talking, I talked to our pastor Scott, and I said, okay, so what are so we want to send out every church plant that has what if we feel comfortable because we're sending our people, what are the minimum things that we want to see, and where are our, do we want a video preaching? Do we want all these things? And so that's what I'm talking to him. I'm like, okay, so we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. But what is the DNA that we want to have? And so from that, and I know Family Church does it one way, Summit does it one way. We're pretty open right now, and we're trying to lead the model of the plant based on the context of where the planter wants to go and their giftedness as a person who God has designed them to be. And we walk through that with them and just say, okay, so based on who you are and what ministry model gets you excited, what do you think this would look like? So generally, we're looking at two places. We're looking at send cities identified through NAM, and our process, walks right alongside NAM's process through the assessment and the training and all those things. So we try to marry that together. So we look through the send cities, and then now that Florida's the send state, and that opened it up massively. Because our area is growing quite a bit locally, and locally, the primary way of that is starting as a campus. They choose their own name and their own thing, but they would as a campus to help them kind of get off the ground. maybe financially, with sermon prep and things like that, but always with the idea of launching them autonomous whenever they can, as soon as they can. So they can be autonomous from day one if they want, or they can start as a campus locally. Now, we wouldn't do a campus if we're going to Boston or Las Vegas or something like that. I mean, they're autonomous day one, and they would take a few families from the church to go do that with them. But so we've kind of left the model and some of those things open to the planter, as long as they can articulate it. I mean, they don't come to me and be like, well, I think I ought to do this. I want to go plant church in Portland. I'm like, have you ever been to Portland? No, I've never been outside of Florida. It's like, okay, so you might be a few years out. Let's go, let's go figure this out. So it's not that wide open, but if they can articulate the model of the church they want to do and understand how that relates to the context of where they're going and who they're trying to reach, then we're like, okay, let's figure that out and we'll send you out like that. But
have you guys experienced a lot of pushback, like from people in the church? Like, I'm not trying to dig in too much, but like when not only your pastor and you guys started to do this, like, was there a lot of meetings that had to happen, like explanations, or was it kind of like, this is where we're going and how you can pray and give and go?
Yeah, I came in on the tail end of a lot of the groundwork that had been done. So a lot of international missions, getting the people focused on the nations, community missions, a focus on discipleship, and then a partnership with we're talking Tanner Turley up in Boston and the church plant there. So to kind of normalize sending and things like that. And so I came in at the end of that, and the church was kind of ready. So one of the big things is, we're in a building program right now, right? So we're building a new sanctuary, and there are a lot of, we could talk a lot about that and all those things, but part of, as we fundraised for it, and this wasn't even my recommendation, this was the pastor and the admin pastor's recommendation, that 10% of everything given towards the building goes towards church planting. And so we funded our program through our building program. And so we've had 2 campaigns, 10% of all that has gone there. And to the point where we're like, okay, how are we going to come up with this extra to do it? And I'm sitting there, I'm like, yeah, I know where you got the money for it. It's just sitting right here. And I even like casually mention it, and I get scolded because like, we're not touching that. Like that is to send. And so like, so the support there from that, and then as they pitch it to the church, like nobody, like, no, they ask questions, like clarifying questions, like, okay, why are we planning a church and building a building at the same time? And like, well, we need to do both. We need more space to reach the people around us, but there are some people that will never come here that we need to go reach. And so it's almost like a mental connection where it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So we get that question a lot, like, well, why are we doing both? Or how does this work? And then it's just like overcoming that mental obstacle. It wasn't a heart thing. It was like, okay, explain to me why this is going on. And then it's like, okay, I got it. And so when they hear about church plan, I get comments and questions, and it almost like reveals these like secret church planners that are at our church who 50, 60 years ago were a part of a church plant somewhere and different things. Sorry.
Wow.
And they're sharing their experiences and things like that. And they've caught the vision incredibly. And I think that's the grace of God and God's providence in that. And I think it's the pastor and the staff just kind of tilling that ground for such a long time. Like I said, I walked into a garden I didn't dig, right, and it was ready to go. Cool. And I just had to connect the dots with a lot of people for church planning, show them that the foundations are in Acts, and it's like, okay, let's do this, and so. Yeah.
So what would you say to pastors, leaders, if they're wanting to develop and pray for a more of a sending culture where it's not just about gathering, but sending, whether that's campuses or plants, or maybe just international missions, sending missionaries?
Yeah.
What would be some encouragements you'd give them today?
Yeah, I think from the top, the lead pastor's got to have a deep conviction about it, about doing kingdom work in general. And kingdom work, realizing that you might be involved in projects and things that you never see fruit from, but the kingdom will see fruit from. Being open-handed with your resources. So I think if the church is not sending now, just starting sending teams and people to experience church plants, international missions, community ministry. What I've seen in churches like ours is a lot of times they're engaged. Church planting is almost the last one to come, which is interesting, but it is the way it is. But International missions tends to be an easier sell, like the gospel needs to go to the nations, or even community ministry, helping out in local things. The staff asked ourselves a question: if we disappeared, would the community even notice? And that caused them to be like, well, maybe not. Maybe we're not as integral to that. And so started to lean forward into helping with schools and different things like that. So I think getting the people outward focused, kingdom focused, and then just talking about how natural church planting is in scripture. I mean, Acts is an easy place to do that, but it's just like, it's not like super churches don't church plant. Like churches church plant. Like we sent out our and this is what we've told, our church plant just went out in August. And when we sent them out, not in August, in April, they launched on Easter. We released them from the residency in January. And one of the last things that we said is, hey, you're on the clock, right? So we want him to plant a church. And it's like, well, why do you want? It's like, if that's what healthy churches do, why would we not expect this church? So it's not about size or resources, or it's about kingdom-minded perspective. Like, we're sending out churches that we want to plant churches. And that's the mentality. It's got to be the mentality, but it's got to come from that lead pastor. And like, he would work it into sermons and lessons and opportunities as often as he could to just normalize it. He's talking about it. And so and the church planning was almost like like I said, it was like a mental hurdle. Like, how do we do this, rather than a spiritual heart hurdle? Now, if you have that block, there's another thing. And I think helping with community ministry and international ministry is maybe an easier push in there to try to get the heart of your people, towards the kingdom. But it's not large or small, it's everybody. So
it's good. That's real good. Well, listen, this has been a great conversation, and I can't thank you enough for being our guest. And we could go on and on. Honestly, we can keep talking about this, because I believe this is an extremely important part of church culture, one that can be pushed to the backside or to the corner, to the sidelines, if we're not intentional about it. I think that's the thing, is your pastor was intentional about it. You're being intentional about it. There's intentionality there. And so there has to be intentional things there. So listen, we're going to drop your contact information in our show notes. If anybody wants to reach out or anything like that, we'd love to hear from you as well. You can email us at thepastorpod@gmail.com. We'd love to connect with you, continue this conversation about church planting, because it is dear to our heart, because we believe it is dear to God's heart, as it is one of the greatest means possible to help more people know and follow Jesus. So from Aaron, Josh, and myself, from the Pastor Pod, have a great weekend.